I'll say something. This is
Okay.
Catherine
All
White.
right. So Catherine White is starting.
Yep. And I'll just say, hello, everybody. And this is Catherine White, and I'm so glad you're here. And I just want to give a shout out for the Women's Summit experience that will kick off on June 20th. We have an opening day rally at noon, and then 10 days of programming that you'll want to check out at networknova.org, and I'll put that in the chat. Sandi Fox is here with us. Sandi has done stuff for us previously at the Women's Summit, and I'm so glad that she has agreed to be here today also to do this. She's done it at the summit at a breakout, but now we're doing it virtually. So thank you, Sandi, and I will mute myself now and enjoy the digital training. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm super excited to be here with the NOVA Women's Summit for the second year in a row, this time digitally due to COVID and all the other crazy things that are going on these days. Sometimes it feels like a little bit of an apocalypse, but we are all surviving in our own ways and really looking out for one another. And doing some organizing on our own. And digital is really right now the best way for us to organize, because unfortunately, due to the pandemic, a lot of in-person organizing has been canceled or postponed. We can no longer do rallies in person in a safe way. We can no longer do door-to-door organizing. So we're turning instead to digital tools to be able to do that. And we're going to cover a bunch of stuff today. So what we are going to cover is, number one, what is digital organizing? Number two, how to build a digital campaign plan. So we're going to give you those building blocks so that you on your own can put together your own digital campaign plan for yourself or for an organization you care about. We're going to go over some case studies so you can see how some of these digital campaign plans come into action. Then we're going to go over some things that we've learned. And then we're going to have some breakout sessions that are going to allow you to build your own campaign plan based on a scenario. Now, hopefully everyone received the handouts for this training from STAIR. If not, please check your email. You should have received a cheat sheet and a breakout worksheet. So make sure you have access to those for you to use. We'll be creating breakout groups a little bit later on, groups probably of 4 or 5. Now, if you have questions, I know that some of the stuff I'm going to be covering is complicated. And I will ask at certain points if people have any questions. And I ask that you put those questions into the chat. And then if Catherine or Stair could then read me those questions if they're relevant to what we are covering in that moment. If they aren't, I might be covering it soon. So we're going to hold off on those questions that don't really apply necessarily to what was just covered. And any questions that don't get answered throughout will get answered at the end. Okay, so let's jump in. So in the chat, I'd love for you all to chime in right now and let me know when you think of digital, what words come up, what things come to mind for you? I'm gonna pull open the chat, see what we got here. Social media, action network, well, that's specific, good and very interesting. Technology, Facebook, Twitter, texting, Instagram, good job. Email, virtual, great. Email, PDF, social media, email, Nextdoor. Nextdoor is a great organizing tool, yeah, for local stuff. Harder because it's not as personal. Not necessarily, Rebecca, and we're gonna cover that too. Social and digital, great. You guys covered a lot, good job. So first of all, most people, when I ask that question, say social media. That's the first thing they think of. They think of Facebook and Twitter. And yes, that is definitely digital, but digital now encompasses so much more than that. It's radio, right? We used to ride in our cars, turn on NPR or whatever station we prefer to listen to. And if we miss something, we miss it. We can't go back and listen to it later, right? Now we have digital radio. So we have Sirius, we have all sorts of podcasts where we can not only record our own and put it out there to the masses, but we can listen to ones that are out there now, and we can rewind. We can even share those podcasts on social media and through email and other tools. Mobile, right? Mobile's the best direct response tool out there. We now, most Americans have a smartphone now, right? 86% of Americans have a smartphone, and they have mobile apps on their phones, right? But 96% of Americans have a digital phone where they can actually receive text messages. It's the best direct response tool out there because it's really one of the best ways to cut through the noise and go directly to the person you're trying to reach, which is why peer-to-peer texting and broadcast texting are very helpful right now when we're doing organizing. Next up, TV. Just like radio, right? It's all digital. I know I cut the cord, meaning the cable cord, just last year, and now I rely on Hulu and other apps to watch television on my computer via the internet or via my Apple TV. We can watch YouTube videos, and there's whole communities of YouTubers who have their own shows and channels. So you can record your own show and have an audience of thousands or even millions of people. And of course, that also can be shared on other channels. Then of course, email, which everyone's familiar with. It's still the best direct fundraising tool out there when it comes to digital. And it's great for advocacy and getting people to take actions, though mobile is slightly better with response rates. And of course, web, right? The home of all things. It's mostly the home of long form content in the way that we relate to it. But of course, it's also the home of social media. It's also the home of email. It's also the home of all of our digital versions of TV and radio. So web in its entirety encompasses all of this. But when we think about web, it's really where we read our articles, right? That's where we see blog posts. It's where we host other content. And then lastly, data, right? Everything's being digitized. Hospitals are digitizing records so that it's easier for us to be able to track and save information on people. And of course, that data is also being utilized through cookies on websites and trackers so that people who are marketing to you can follow based on what you're interested in and target ads at you. That's all based on the data they're able to collect on you in the digital space. Any questions here? Okay. So when we're talking about digital programs and doing outreach on digital for an organization, there's a couple pieces of that digital puzzle. Number one, we want quality content. We want content that people actually want to interact with and share and be seen interacting with. We also want to make sure that all of our digital is integrated with the overall organizational strategy if we're doing digital for an organization, right? So we want to make sure that all of our goals are aligned when it comes to our overall mission, and our field team isn't doing something completely different than our digital team. Instead, they're working together. Like we're trying to do recruitment for an event or for a volunteer activity. We send text messages and emails for recruitment, right? They all go hand in hand and integrate and work together for that overall strategy. Authenticity. This is really key, right? You don't want to come off as fake in any of your content or communications via digital, be it social media, text, email. You want to come off as an authentic voice on your channels so that people actually trust and want to interact with it. Targeted engagement. This, of course, is incredibly key because we don't want to be, for instance, sending an invitation to an event that is in West Virginia to folks who are in Northern Virginia, right? Maybe someone who lives near the border of West Virginia in Virginia, right? We want to target based on geography. We want to target based on activity or interest, so that all of the people we are trying to communicate with and do outreach to are wanting to actually get that content, right? And find out about that information that we're trying to share with them. Data analytics. We always try to keep metrics on all of our outreach efforts that we're doing over digital and that we're doing in any other outreach aspects of our organization, right? This data analytics allows for us to make decisions in the future to see what works and doesn't work. Another key piece to that is experimentation. Try new things to see what works and doesn't work with your audience. One of the things I tell people all the time is you are not your audience, okay? No matter if you think your audience happens to be white women over the age of 50, there are plenty of white women over the age of 50 who don't think like you. So the best thing to do is when you are targeting your audience is to test it, to see what subject lines do better, to see what content performs better on social media. Maybe it's actions or images, right? To see what text message link works best, whether you're personalizing it in a certain way, to test who the sender of the message is. There's lots of different ways to test that we should always be doing when we are running a digital program. Okay. So what is digital organizing? We just talked about digital in a full program, right? First of all, it's just an extension of in-person organizing. How many people on this training right now have done in-person organizing? Just reply yes in the chat. Great, lots of people. I figured with this group that would make sense. So basically, digital organizing is just that, is basically an extension, right? So when we are organizing one-on-one, door-to-door, right? It's about it being in the exact same geographic location as the person you're trying to reach. I have to be at their door in order to speak with them. With phone banking, right? I can talk to one person at a time, but I don't have to be in the exact geographic location. I could be, in an office across town, right? Or God knows where, right? But I still have to talk one-on-one, right? But I'm calling them. Now, when we're doing text messaging, peer-to-peer, again, it's one-on-one, and I don't have to be in that exact location, but it's also a little bit quicker, right? Because I just press send a lot of times. And then I wait and respond to those messages. And so that's taking it a little more into the digital space. And then when we get into email and social media and broadcast texting, which is mass texting, like email, then it's about scale, right? So we're scaling up and being able to not just go one-on-one, but actually go one to thousands or millions. And then, of course, all of our organizing stems from the ultimate goal of moving constituents or voters up that ladder of engagement to get them to take an action, be it getting them to vote, getting them to get more engaged with your organization. Is everyone here familiar with the ladder of engagement? Just reply in the chat. Okay, we're gonna cover that. So don't worry. And so the key thing here is, again, we know we live in a really volatile and disrupted world, and the best way to meet people is where they are. And that is on digital devices, be it their laptops or their phones, right? We're meeting people where they are, and we want to engage with them and develop relationships. And that's what digital organizing is all about. It's allowing us to scale up in-person organizing. Any questions there before I move on? Okay. So this is an example of a ladder of engagement for an organization. So first touch might be them learning about your organization from a friend or reading a flyer somewhere. And then the next action, the first action they take is to sign up for your email list. And then maybe they get an email about petition and they sign a petition or make a phone call they were asked to make to an elected official. And then maybe they attend a meeting or event, right? So that first stage is what we call our informing and consulting stage, right? We're letting them know about the organization. We're saying, hey, do you want to get more involved? Here's how. And then once we get to that meeting or event piece where they're showing up in person or via virtual one, which I count also as a meeting, especially now, that's our involving stage. You know, we're getting them more involved within the organization. And then the next step is collaborating, right? Getting them to take a step up and volunteer for an event, right? Maybe help man a table at a collaborative event, right? And then lastly is empowering them to maybe take a leadership role and organize their own event. So this is an example of one ladder of engagement. There's many, and and depending on that ladder, they might have multiple steps. Any questions there? Okay, that's a good question. So Maggie asks, attending a meeting, volunteering, and organizing, this isn't going to happen during COVID. How does this change now? So this, for instance, is attending a meeting or an event. You guys are attending a meeting or event, but virtually. Volunteering for event might be someone volunteering to recruit people to attend an online event, right? Organizing an event might be someone organizing to get a speaker to speak to a group, right? Online. So it really doesn't change that much. It's still the same level of engagement. Denise asked, how do we persuade people to provide phone number to keep in touch via calls or texts? Number one, ask, right? So when you, for instance, ask them to sign a petition or make a phone call, when they sign the petition, have a field that says mobile number, right? And then there's specific opt-in language. So if you, in that form, that says, by giving us your email and by giving us your phone number, you agree to receive emails and calls and texts from us on behalf of this organization. And usually for a text opt-in, you have to provide language like text stop to quit, help for more info, data and message rates may apply. But you can do that in any form, right? So it's pretty easy. How do we encourage our networks to share our events? Good question. Ask, right? Send an email with a link to share a post, a Facebook, that promotes a Facebook event, right? Plenty of ways. Ask people to forward an email to their friends and family to participate. Lots of different ways, and that's where social media really plays a big role. Okay, let's keep moving on. Okay, so impact by the numbers, right? There's a reason we can scale up on digital in a way that we can't with in-person organizing, right? This actually, needs to be updated. I apologize. So 86% of Americans own a smartphone and 96% own a cell phone. Over 2.7 billion people use Facebook monthly, and 260 million are active monthly LinkedIn users. And these are older stats, so these are getting updated as well. There's 3.8 billion email users worldwide. Think about that. There's 336 million monthly active users on Twitter, over 1 billion monthly active users on Instagram, and up to 250 million monthly active users on Pinterest. So again, it's about meeting people where they are, and this is where they are, right? And this isn't even all the different digital platforms that we could be using. This is just some. Okay, let's talk about how to build a digital campaign. We're going to cover the building blocks, resources that you can use, and questions you need to ask when you're putting together your own digital campaign. Number one, first and foremost, if you want to start your own campaign, your first question should always be, what is your goal? If you are running an event, right, what is your goal, right? If you are doing a advocacy push, what is your goal? So you always want to make sure your goals are SMART. And when I say SMART, I mean S, specific, right? It's not broad. It's a specific thing you want to do and get changed or make happen, right? Measurable. Can you measure your success or failure, right? So first of all, right, specific. Do we want to, prevent homelessness? That's kind of broad, right? Maybe we want to provide meals to a certain number of homeless people in the city, right? That's also measurable, right? I can say we provided this many meals. Is it achievable, right? If I say that I want to end homelessness, that's not really an achievable goal. It's not really realistic. But if I say that I want to provide this many homeless people with shelter opportunities or meals, that's a little more achievable. Relevance, right? Is there a rationale behind your goal? Is there a real problem that you're trying to solve that other people are going to find relevant and relate to? It can't just be your pet project, right? Other people need to be interested and need to want to get involved with it as well. And lastly, it's time bound, right? Can the goal be achieved within a reasonable period of time? So if I wanted to end homelessness, right, there's no way that's going to be time bound because that could take hundreds of years, unfortunately. But, offering this many homeless families shelter in the month of April, in the winter months, right? That's doable, and that's within a certain period of time. Okay, so whenever you're thinking about your goal, it always has to be SMART. So for this event, we might have wanted to set a goal of how many people would be attending the training. Making that measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. We also might want to have a goal of educating those people on how to build their own campaign plan, right? That is a SMART goal as well. Any questions there? Okay. So after you set your goal, right, you have to figure out who your target is. So say our goal is to get a piece of legislation passed in the Virginia legislature. Now, our target is the decision maker we're trying to motivate to get that decision made in our favor. So maybe it's the governor, depending on the type of advocacy goal we're trying to reach for legislative, or maybe it's the state assembly or state senate, right? So which decision makers are we trying to motivate? And then once we figure out who that is, maybe it's the governor, maybe it's the state legislature, right? Who can best influence those decision makers and help us reach our targets, which is our audience. So our audience are the people who are going to help us get our decision makers, our targets, to do the thing we want them to do. So first we have to know our audience. We have to understand them, right? Our audience are the people who maybe live in the district of the legislators that we want to reach, or who are voters in the state of Virginia, right? Maybe they're female voters in the state of Virginia. Do we know what age groups we want to reach? Maybe we want them to be of a lower or higher income. What's their highest level of education? This all goes into what the goal is, right? If this is a fundraising campaign, maybe we want to target people, we want our audience to be people who might have money, who can then help us reach our targets who also have money. What are their values? If it's progressive legislation we're trying to get passed, right? We want to be reaching out to people who agree with that. And where do they get their information? Is it better for us to reach them via email or text message or social media? What if we, did an op-ed in the newspaper? Will they read it? This all comes into play. And figuring out what type of content works best to reach them, to get them to reach out to our targets. So once again, it's about using our audience to influence our decision maker, who will ultimately make the decision that will help us reach our goal. And in some cases, our audience and our target or decision maker are the same, like voting outreach, right? We are reaching out to all voters in order to best reach certain voters to get out to vote. And when we're trying to reach these audiences, we have to always ask that question that they're going to ask. What's in it for me? Why should they take that action? Come to that event, right? What's the most direct path to reach them? Is it a text message? Is it an email? How do we influence them or educate them on an issue that we care about, that we want them to help with? So before we jump into the rules of planning, right? First, I just want to repeat where we started, right? We set our goal. Then we identified who is the best person to help us reach that goal, person or persons, right? That's our target. And then we identify an audience who's going to help us influence those targets and get us to that goal. Now we get into the question of, what is our strategy to do that audience outreach, to get them to take the actions that are going to move those targets to do what we want them to do? And then we move to tactics. Tactics are not the same as strategy. These are the two pieces of our campaign building blocks that get the most confused. Now, strategy is the overall plan to help reach your goal and audience. Okay? A tactic is the tool I will use to implement that strategy. A good example of that is our strategy is to educate people on the issue that we're working on. Our tactic is how we educate people. We might have a webinar to educate people, or write a blog post, or do an article in the newspaper, right? Or do some infographics that we post on social media. Those are all tactics. That's how we're implementing our strategy. I see we have something in the chat. What resources are available to understand where our audience would get information? It's a really good question. I think a lot of sites like Pew are really helpful in understanding different demographics. And a lot of their information is public. So you can find out that, you know, for instance, people of color in this age demographic are more likely to use email or text message or not. You can get that from them. But really the best way is if you already have that audience and ways to contact them, ask them yourself. So if we're talking about your members, so an organization, right? Survey your members, ask them, how do they get their information, and give them an A, B, C, D, or E, or like check boxes. And then you can see where the majority of your people are getting their information. And yes, Candace, an organization could use a polling firm to do something like that as well. Okay. Any other questions before I move on? Great.
Sandy, there's one question about how do you get people to provide their phone number so you can text them? There's somebody, Denise asked that one. How do you get that information?
Yeah, I answered that earlier.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'd still like to hear another comment on that, because that is one of the things that is difficult. Is like,
You asked for
do you want to make it mandatory that they put in their?
That's something I tell people to test. But usually what we find is if you send them a form for a petition or a volunteer sign up, and you offer the mobile field, more often than not, they will fill it out. And as long as you have the required opt-in language, they are opting in to get text messages or emails from you. Okay.
Yes, but I'm sorry, but I still find that if you don't make it required, people like to skip it.
I mean, you can try requiring it. It's really up to you. I always tell people to test it, because what you could end up having is less people take action if you require it. It really varies depending on the audience. So
Thank you.
like I said, experimentation is really important. So send half your list, the field with it required, and half the list with it not required. And then see how you do. Okay, so we talked about just before how to know what are the best channels to reach your audience for them to get the information from you. Now, in the cheat sheet, you have a more outlined version that includes the age demographics that tend to use the different social media channels, which could be another tool for you. And I'm not going to go over this because you do have it in writing. But again, each of these different channels are good for different use cases, depending on what your goal is and the type of information you are trying to get out, collect, or actions you're trying to get taken, okay? So when you're planning a campaign, one of the first things you should be doing is figuring out what your resources are. Because when you're determining what your tactics are and strategies, you can't do everything because you don't know what you have at your disposal unless you do a review of your resources. So in the chat, could folks tell me, when you think of what the resources are you need to look over, can you put some examples of resources that you have to think about? Human, financial, yep. Time, money and time, yep. Time, expertise, yep. Energy, time, people, money. You guys got it. So number one, people, what your capacity is, right? Say you want to do peer-to-peer text messaging, but you only have 2 staff members and like no volunteers, and you want to reach 100,000 people via text. You can't really do that because you need someone to press send on every message. So that's not really realistic. But say you have 2 staff members and hundreds of volunteers who you can then train to send those messages, right? Maybe you want to build a website for your campaign, a microsite. But do you have someone on staff who's a developer who can do that for you? Or do you need to hire someone, right? That's also when time and money come in, right? So say we want to build a website and we need to, this campaign is only for the next 2 months. So we need to get that website up in the next like 2 weeks. Do we have someone in-house who can build it for us? Do we have the money to pay someone to build it for us in that time frame, right? If we're doing text messaging for an election and the election is in 2 weeks, right? Do we need to pay texters to send the messages? And do we have the money to do that? So all of these pieces will change what tactics we employ to implement our strategies and to what level or degree we do it. Maggie asked, what is evergreen information or evergreen content? That is a really good question. My much longer 5-hour digital organizing training covers that. So there are 3 primary types of content. Evergreen content is the primary content you are going to be using that basically lives forever. So when it comes to evergreen content, it's the stuff that you don't need to update that's not timely. So a blog post that is about general best practices, or that isn't specific to an event, right? That would be evergreen content. Or basic, why it's important to vote. That would be evergreen content versus content that says vote on November 7th. That is not evergreen because that content will expire and the next election year will be on a different date. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Sandy.
No problem. So we just covered campaign plans and figuring out what our resources are. So here are 2 examples of different types of very basic campaign outlines. Not plans, but campaign outlines. Number 1 is the goal is to advance or stop legislation. Our decision maker, in this case, is going to be government officials. Our audience is going to be constituents of those government officials. And we have to figure out if we're going to be targeting different segments of the population. Maybe we are only targeting constituents in certain districts, maybe only women of a certain age. What do we know about them and how do we influence them, right? That's how we determine our strategy. Example 2, our goal is to influence the outcome of the election, right? Our decision maker in this case is voters. Our audience is also voters, right? So our audience might be more targeted. Maybe we're only targeting voters who are likely voters who voted in the last 2 or 3 elections, or Democrats who voted in the last few elections. And then we have to figure out what we know about them and how do we influence them and reach out to them. Okay. Any questions before we move on to our first case study? Oh, Candace, what are the other two types of content? The other two types of content are, oh my gosh, why am I blanking on the names in this very moment? So crazy. Mondays, guys. I have the case of the Mondays. One is similar to evergreen content, but it's specific to events and your organization's mission. So for instance, if you're a environmental organization, you're planning content that makes the most sense for your organization to post on a particular campaign. So there's evergreen content, and then, why am I blanking on the name right now? And then the other content is environmental content that is based on a campaign you're running or an event you're having. So it is more specific to time as opposed to evergreen. And then lastly, we have content that is specific to the news cycle. So it's, I don't know why, it's on the tip of my tongue. I don't know why I can't think of it at this very moment. Basically, it's when you, oh, thank you. Newsjacking. The last one is newsjacking. So if something big happens in the news, you tie in your own mission and content to that news. So for instance, a good example of it done well is that basically when the Super Bowl happened, for instance, and there was a blackout, Oreo Cookies posted an image that was hilarious. I don't have it right now because I don't have my slide. About you can still dunk your Oreos at night. And it had like an image of like the Oreo being like a blackout of the moon. And that took off on Twitter in the middle of the Super Bowl. Cheerios, when Prince died, posted a graphic having to do with Prince and Cheerios. Things like that. That's newsjacking. Okay. Let's get to our first case study. So some of you might be familiar with Pink Out Day. The first one was held in 2015 when I was working at Planned Parenthood. And so I had a front row seat / I helped organize Pink Out Day. And Pink Out Day happened for a lot of reasons. So a little background. Number one, this was a time when we were being attacked by right-wing extremists. A bunch of videos were released that were false and highly edited to make it look like Planned Parenthood had done some awful things, which we hadn't. And it was accelerating defunding efforts by state and federal legislators. So a lot of people were really pissed about the attacks that were happening and rallying around Planned Parenthood. And we wanted to really get all of that energy to be targeted into one day of action. So we had our larger Stand with PP campaign, and we created Pink Out Day as a major activist day as part of the larger Stand with PP campaign. We gave ourselves 3 to 4 weeks to plan for that one day of action. And the goal was to demonstrate the breadth and depth of Planned Parenthood's massive supporter base in the face of opposition and attacks to gain momentum for the fights ahead. So the goal was ultimately to show that you really didn't want to mess with us, right? We have that support. So our targets in this Pink Out Day were supporters, the 1 in 5 women who've been to Planned Parenthood in their lifetime, elected officials, and the general public. Our audience that was going to help us reach those targets were allied progressive organizations, supporters, elected officials who are champions of reproductive rights, and the media. Now, our strategy to reach those audiences were, number 1, organize and amplify the massive public display of support that was already happening around the attacks that were directed towards Planned Parenthood. Remind the public that 1 in 5 women has been to Planned Parenthood in her lifetime. Project a "you don't want to mess with us" narrative to elected officials through our support. And utilize digital to show online support and recruit for offline activities. So again, this is our strategy to get our audience to then influence our targets to reach our goal, to show that large breadth of support that we have. Now, once we figured out our strategy, we needed to come up with tactics to implement that strategy. How are we going to organize and amplify the public support? How are we going to remind people that 1 in 5 women has been to Planned Parenthood? How are we going to project that "you don't want to mess with us" narrative? And how are we going to do online to offline action? So for strategy online to offline action, our first tactic that I'm showing you here, and of course, these aren't all the tactics we ensued, but these are some of the really successful digital ones we did. We sent text messages to our list, and we had 20% go to our Pink Out landing page to sign up for an event. We had events all across the country, and if we didn't have an event in your city, we allowed people using an event tool to create your own event in your own city to get people to sign up and show up in person. So we used text messaging and got 20% to go to that landing page and sign up for an event. That was our online to offline, right? Texting is online, showing up in person for an event offline. One of our other strategies, massive display of public support, right? We used a tool that allowed people to change their profile picture on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Tumblr. And so when they used this and all of their friends saw their picture on Facebook, it showed that all of their friends and family who were supporting Planned Parenthood. So we asked people to pink out their profile picture on Pink Out Day and leading up to it. Another way we had a massive public display is we asked people on Pink Out Day to post a Pink Out selfie. We asked them on social media, via email, and via text message. And as you can see here, we even had Ariana Grande pink out her profile picture and then post it on Pink Out Day as her Pink Out selfie. One of our other strategies was remind people about the 1 in 5 women who've been to Planned Parenthood in their lifetime. We asked people to share their stories. On Instagram, this is an example of a woman sharing that Planned Parenthood discovered her stage 3 cancer at 19 years old and saved her life. Right? These stories are so important and reminds people that they know someone who has relied on Planned Parenthood for basic health care. Next, we talked about having a "you don't want to mess with us" narrative so that elected officials knew that we were a force to be reckoned with. We worked with progressive organizations in our coalition to compile and deliver 2.4 million signatures. And these were all digital petition signatures that we then printed out. And when I put in quotes printed out, I mean we printed out a few pages and then put a file drive that had the rest of the petition signatures in these boxes when we delivered them. So again, it went from online to offline. So this actually covered 2 of our strategies. Impact by the numbers. Stand with PP and Pink Out trended in the top 3 nationally and the top 10 globally on Twitter. We didn't make the top 2 because it was also National Coffee Day. And I can't remember what the other one was, but it was another like food related thing. But we did have a couple women actually wear pink lipstick and kiss their coffee cup and use both tags on it. We had over 153,000 Pink Out posts on Instagram, and we trended there as well. And 450,000 people pinked out their profile pics. Over 1,000 people sent us their Pink Out selfies over SMS. And over 131,000 people visited our Pink Out landing page on Pink Out Day. Some pretty good numbers. So how can we use these tactics? Before I go into that, I do want to show you, these are 2 of my favorite Pink Out pictures. This one woman actually knit this pink sweater for her chicken. We had some really great pet Pink Out selfies that were posted. So how can you use these tactics yourself, right? Number 1, know your strengths and offer them to local nonprofits as a volunteer. Maybe you have graphic design skills. Maybe you're a good writer and can write a blog or Tumblr or op-ed, right? Maybe you're great on the phones and you can help with phone banking. Twibbon is the tool that we used for pinking out your profile pic. It's one of the many free tools that you can use to help get your message out for a larger campaign. I highly recommend it more for a large scale campaign around a particular issue. And of course, you can organize your own family and friends via email, text message, social media, and support your own events or an event for an organization you work for, online or offline. Okay, any questions? What digital tools and tactics will help us coordinate actions by many groups to avoid redundant or conflicting actions? That's hard. A lot of major national groups struggle with this, right? But keep in mind, if you're doing with Stand with PP, we were able to collect 2.4 million signatures to stand with Planned Parenthood because ACLU and NOLEO and the AFL and like a bazillion other big organizations sent out petitions to their lists. And while sometimes you have to be careful about duplicating efforts, in this case, it scaled the effort. So it really depends on what your goal is for the campaign and what you're trying to get accomplished. But coalition politics is always difficult. But really when it counts, these kind of groups come together to really make a difference. Hope that answers your question. It's a little more complicated, obviously, but I hope I did my best. Any other questions before we move on to the next case study? Okay. Well, I'm going to give everyone a 5-minute break if you want to get up and go to the bathroom or grab a drink, coffee, bourbon, your choice. So it's 8:03 right now. We'll pick back up at 8:08. Sorry, it's 8:02, so we'll pick back up at 8:07. John asked how long we expect this to last. So this is a 90-minute training. I'm not sure why it was advertised from 7 to 8. It will definitely be going till at least 8:30, and it might go a little longer depending on how many questions people have. And David, you'll be getting a recording of this training. So the email you got should have 2 handouts that you'll be using. So Maggie is asking about the Pink Out case study. Many of the measures of success dealt with number of petitions, selfies. My concern is that all those measures are in the digital world. They are not in real life. So this is because I only gave you the specific digital goals and measures of success. There were also numbers of events that we held nationwide, number of attendees of those events, So a number of people who showed up to deliver the petition signatures. There were a lot of other measures of success for the entire day that were both online and offline. But again, this is digital organizing, so I covered primarily the digital organizing pieces here. And you said that as a non-social media user, you tend to be skeptical about actions that don't result in real change. Try not to keep that view. Real change happens online, okay? A lot is happening online. A lot of minds are being changed online. A lot of organizing is happening online, and you can be a part of that too. Okay, we're gonna get started again. So hopefully everyone is back at their screens. It is now 8:07. And we're gonna talk about our second case study, which is very much related to our first. In fact, it happened around the exact same time. Some of you may or may not be familiar and remember this specific campaign that occurred in September of 2015. It was called Shout Your Abortion. And Amelia Bono is the woman in the picture right here. And this was the campaign that she helped start. In the chat, let me know if you're familiar with this campaign. Yes or no is suffice. Yeah, a little bit of a mix. Okay. So, give you a little bit of background. Local activists in Seattle, Amelia Bono and Kim Morrison, were having a conversation as friends about their own abortions, and they realized that they and their peers really rarely talked about their personal experiences with abortion, and that was likely due to stigma around the procedure. So they really wanted to try to destigmatize abortion in our culture. And Amelia ultimately wanted to, start videoing women telling their stories. And she set a goal that was not really a smart goal. Let's be completely honest, okay? It was to destigmatize abortion in our culture. This is definitely not the easiest of things to get accomplished. And as we know from our varied ages in this group right here, it's been something we've been trying to do now for decades, probably even centuries, okay? So they didn't really create their own campaign plan, but I read an article where Amelia was interviewed, and I put this together based on everything she talked about, which made it clear that they did have these little building blocks in how they got started. So their targets for this campaign to reach that goal were those who use stigmatizing language around abortion and women who've had an abortion within those networks, right? And the audience they were going to use to reach those targets are women who've had an abortion and allies within the reproductive rights movement. Now, the strategy was to push back against the negative narratives surrounding abortion that create the stigma. Number 2, remind people that abortion is the norm and that 1 in 3 women have had an abortion. Educate the public on the fact that 95% don't regret their abortion, and many refer to it as an actual positive experience. And then lastly, use storytelling to put a face on those common shared experiences. Okay, so in this case, you saw in our last case study, storytelling was actually a tactic used to implement one of our strategies. Now, in this case, we're using storytelling as a strategy, and then we're going to use specific ways of storytelling to actually develop the different tactics. Okay, looks like we have some quick questions. Nope, just comments. Cool. Okay, so moving on. These are some of the tactics that were employed to touch on those strategies. So number one, storytelling and reminding people of the 1 in 3 women who have had an abortion. So one of the things about this campaign is that it kind of took on a life of its own. Like I said, Amelia originally just really wanted to start by telling her story and then hopefully videoing the stories of others. When she shared her own story on Facebook, a friend of hers named Lindy West, who has now written a bunch of books and articles, so you might be familiar with her, saw her post and she said, hey, can I screenshot this and share it on my social media? And Amelia said, sure, go for it. So Lindy posted Amelia Bono's story and then created the hashtag #ShoutYourAbortion. And then it just took off and had a life of its own. So hundreds of thousands of people were tweeting their own abortion stories and sharing them on Instagram and sharing them on Tumblr and sharing them on Facebook with the #ShoutYourAbortion hashtag. Then we come to one of her original tactics that she wanted to employ, storytelling, right? She used video as her tactic for that storytelling strategy. So she actually videoed multiple women anonymously telling their stories within the Seattle area. So again, strategy is storytelling, tactic is using video for that storytelling. So some impact by the numbers. Shout Your Abortion was tweeted over 100,000 times in a 24-hour period on September 24th. Notice the date. September 29th is Pink Out Day. This is right in the midst of people being really fucking pissed. Sorry, pardon my French. Really, really mad about the attacks on Planned Parenthood and reproductive rights. So people were like looking for a way to channel their anger. And this was one of those ways. 24 Shout Your Abortion stories were recorded and included on the campaign's official YouTube channel. Over 34 articles were published about the campaign and abortion stigma between September 19th and the end of October. That is intense. That is a crazy amount of free organic news media that money can't buy. Okay, now how can you use these tactics yourself? Number one, know the influencers in your network. Lindy West had over 60,000 followers at the time. That's how Shout Your Abortion as a campaign really started to take off. Okay, so know who is in your network who has that kind of following. Okay. Tap into existing hashtag activism campaigns. Speak out and add your voice. Don't create a hashtag unless you have 60,000 followers, okay? Like, there are plenty of hashtags out there that are important and that you can add your voice to and contribute to the important mission and goals of that campaign. Think about your own story of self and how you can utilize your own story to promote the issues you care about. Any questions about that campaign before we move into what we've learned? Oh, I got called out for my F-bomb. Yes, I am very passionate about these things. Okay, so what have we learned? Do's and don'ts. Remember, do clearly lay out your goals, who your target is, and your audiences first, always. You don't need to be a big organization to launch a successful campaign. Amelia Bono and her friend Kim and Lindy West are 3 people. Okay? Think creatively about your central action, right? How can you best cut through the noise on social media, in email, to have a successful action? What can you do differently? Tap into anger while the iron is hot. Shout Your Abortion was in the midst of continual attacks on Planned Parenthood and reproductive rights. People who are passionate about these issues were angry, right? This gave them an outlet. Both the Stand with PEP, Pink Out Day, and Shout Your Abortion were all campaigns that gave them an outlet for how angry they were and what they were upset about. When your campaign has momentum, put your foot on the gas, feed the beast, right? Repeat tactics that do well, and then pull back any tactics that aren't working and switch it up. Try new things, experiment. And you can, but you shouldn't do it alone. Amelia Bono had her friend Lindy West, right? You can reach out to organizations in your space, form your own coalitions, or tap into existing coalitions, and know your influencers in your community, in real life, and also on social media, or both. Be the first mover, especially in a competitive environment. When we were doing campaigns at Planned Parenthood around the Supreme Court, we planned ahead, right? So when the decision came down, we were the first out the gate with an action for people to take. Tell a story, right? Storytelling is really the best way for people to actually relate to your campaign and the issues that you're talking about. Now, to go back to that first mover piece, the only way we were the first mover when it came to a Supreme Court case is we anticipated potential scenarios and outcomes. We planned for campaigns for a win, a lose, or a maybe we don't know what's happening situation. And once the decision came down, we just pressed send on the one we had ready to go. Be nimble. This goes along with that as well, right? Continually adjust your content based on what's working and resonating. What else? Is there anything else you feel you've learned from this training today? In the comments, let's see. Scope, yeah. Understanding your scope and what you can and cannot do. Always be scanning your environment. Yeah, pay attention. Things are changing every day and you have to adapt. Yep, focusing on planning and understanding your resources. You can build a really strong campaign and then you can actually implement it. It's always better to have a campaign plan to start to work from. Yes, and always bring in others to help. You can do it alone, but you shouldn't have to. Okay, now let's talk about our don'ts. Don't figure out your tactics. I can't even tell you how many times I've been in a meeting where they're like, oh, what's our hashtag gonna be? Before you figure out your campaign goals and strategy. What's your goal? Who are your targets? Who's your audience? What's your strategy to reach those audiences? And then how are we gonna implement our strategy? That is your tactic. That is the last thing you come up with. Don't overuse legislative jargon. I can tell you how many times I've seen smaller or statewide organizations say, vote for HR 581. What is HR 581? I have no idea. This is why you need to make sure to actually give it a name that people will remember and understand. There are certain tools that let you post to 2 social media platforms at once. Don't do this. Every social media platform has a different format, has different ways of writing, and certain word counts or character counts. On Facebook, we don't use hashtags. On Instagram and Twitter, we do. If I tie my Instagram account to my Twitter account, it doesn't post the picture as part of my tweet, it posts the link instead. This is why you don't tie those two together. If I post on Instagram and put in a whole bunch of hashtags and then share it to my Facebook, on Facebook, they don't understand why I have all these hashtags. Okay? This is really important. Always you can have similar content on each platform, but always do it separately. And you can use a tool like Buffer, which is a free tool for you to be able to schedule posts on all the different social networks you use. Don't invent new hashtags because you want your own, right? Tap into existing conversations that are already happening to drive your narrative. Don't stick with something if it's not resonating. Okay. Any questions before we go to the breakouts? So we are going to go a little over just based on some of the questions we had already. So we probably will have a much shorter Q&A at the end. But we're going to save, so the next 20 minutes. So we're going to go, so I'm going to give you all 20 minutes. And I'm going to ask that Stare, who has control, create breakout rooms of around, I think I see people driving out, they're like, I don't want to do this. I hope you stay, because I have a really great case study for you guys to write a campaign plan for. But please, if you could put everyone in breakout groups of about 4 to 5 people each. And then we'll come back together in 20 minutes after you've created your campaign plan. That is reading the scenario together, then setting your goal, your targets, your audience, your strategy, and then we're down to 14. People really don't want to do the breakouts. So if you want
Sandy, I want to say that it has gotten quite late.
Yeah.
So maybe offering up something at this point, a sort of a wrap up. I mean, it's 8:24, so let's do a wrap up.
Okay.
And close.
Yeah. So I think
thank you.
People have the sheet, so if you want to do it at home on your own, you're welcome to. And then we're closing at 8:30. So if anyone has any last questions before we sign off, but I see that most people are signing off now. So if you have any questions, you can always email me. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Sandy. I thought that this was really, really helpful. And we will have this on video record available for people. So
great.
Watch your inbox for that. And I appreciate everyone's time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Yes, good night, everybody. Thank you, Sandy. It was excellent.
It was excellent. And I think that it's always gives us these steps to think through when we're doing something.
I need it for the Women's Summit. That's what we're going to talk about tomorrow, Stare. Thank you, Sandy.
Strategy. Thank you all.
Awesome. We may be calling you tomorrow. Okay, bye, Sandy.
Bye-bye.